Do you understand what you're doing? If things get out of control, you'll pay the price." Richard Evans uttered each word with a cold voice that echoed through his oak-paneled office. Across from him was Clara, the young nurse his wife had hired on her own. In Richard's eyes, she was nothing more than an amateur, an uncontrolled variable in his perfect plan to fix his daughter. He had spent millions of dollars on the world's leading experts, people who spoke in complex charts and treatment protocols. And this girl? She only had experience taking care of her sick younger brother and a ridiculous amount of optimism. Richard believed he was issuing a necessary warning. He couldn't have imagined that his powerful words wouldn't be the start of a firing, but the beginning of the collapse of the very worldview he had built. The journey to that tense confrontation didn't begin with a bang, but with a heart-wrenching silence, a silence that had stretched for years in their home. The Evans family's mansion stood proudly on a private hill, a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the glittering city. Everything inside was perfect and cold. The polished Italian marble floors reflected the light from a giant crystal chandelier. Expensive artworks hung on pristine white walls. The air always carried a faint scent of lemongrass, essential oil. This house felt more like a gallery than a home, a place created to impress, not to live. It was so perfect it lacked any human warmth. It was almost 10 p.m. The roar of a silver sports car's engine shattered the stillness, a familiar sound announcing the return of the master of the house. Richard Evans stepped inside, a tall figure dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. He loosened his silk Hermes tie, as if it were a ritual, and placed his alligator leather briefcase on a meticulously polished teak desk. Another 14-hour workday had come to an end. His wife, Helen, was sitting on a large cream-colored sofa, looking small and out of place. She was holding a hardcover book, but her slender fingers rested listlessly on the page, and her eyes gazed blankly into the distance. "You're still up?" Richard asked, his voice neither accusatory nor caring. It was simply a question born of habit for a perpetually busy person, someone accustomed to brief and efficient communication. Helen started as if waking from a dream, quickly placing the book on the glass table beside her. "I was waiting for you. I saved your dinner in the microwave." "I already ate," he replied curtly, walking toward the dimly lit bar where expensive foreign liquors were lined up like an honor guard. He poured himself a glass of single malt whiskey, the amber liquid swirling in the crystal glass. A party with Japanese partners. Couldn't refuse. Important contract. Helen sighed, a sound almost swallowed by the vastness of the living room. She stood up, walking slowly toward him. "Richard, we need to talk about Lily." The name Lily hung in the air. Richard took a sip of his whiskey, feeling the familiar burning sensation spread down his throat. That was how he dealt with problems that couldn't be solved with a meeting. "Did Dr. Thompson call?" "I already told my secretary to arrange an appointment with Professor Klein in Zurich. He's the best expert in Europe for children's spinal injuries." "It's not about doctors, Richard," Helen said, her voice trembling slightly, deep fatigue etched in her eyes. "It's about her. She hasn't said a word all week, not even to me. She just sits there, looking out the window, as if she's not even here anymore. I really don't know what to do anymore." Richard placed his whiskey glass on the granite countertop harder than necessary, creating a dry, decisive clink. The weakness in his wife's voice annoyed him. "I'm doing everything I can, Helen. The best experts, the best equipment, the best nurses, everything. What more do you want me to do? Abandon a thriving corporation to stay home and tell her fairy tales?" Helen's helplessness and pain clashed with the icy wall of Richard's practicality. For him, Lily's tragedy was a problem, a faulty project that needed to be fixed. And his solution, as always, was money. A lot of money. He had spent millions on Lily's rehabilitation after the tragic car accident a year ago. That accident had taken her legs, and, even worse, seemed to have stolen her soul. "I didn't mean that," Helen whispered. curling inward as if his words were a cold draft. It's just, she needs her father. She has her father here, Richard snapped, his voice slightly irritable. He didn't like being questioned, especially when he believed he had done everything that needed to be done, and her father is working tirelessly to ensure she gets the best care in the world. Now, I really have some important emails to handle. He turned his back, a definitive gesture to end the conversation. He went straight up the stairs to his office on the second floor, leaving Helen alone in the solitude of the living room. She stood there for a long time, watching her husband's shadow fade, then looked toward the dark hallway where her daughter's room was. In the room decorated like a princess's chamber, with soft pink wallpaper and expensive stuffed animals, Lily Evans sat in a high-tech wheelchair worth more than a car. Her blue eyes, once sparkling like stars, were now lifeless, fixed on the large window overlooking the perfectly manicured garden. Outside, the city was still brilliant with lights, skyscrapers rising like giant candles, but her world was now just a dull gray and silent. The following weeks passed in suffocating silence. The experts came and went. Physical therapists, psychologists, nutritionists. They all carried briefcases filled with lengthy reports and complex medical jargon. They all clinically agreed that Lily's physical body could partially recover, but her psychological trauma was a locked door for which they had no key. It was in that state of utter despair, when the expensive solutions proved useless, that Helen made a decision. It didn't come from a report or professional advice. It came from an old friend who called to check in. The friend told her about a young nurse named Clara. "This girl doesn't have a degree from Harvard or Oxford," the friend said. "Her resume isn't impressive either. But she has something no school can teach. She has a warm heart, Helen. Her younger brother was paralyzed from birth, and she took care of him by herself. She understands pain, and she knows how to be patient. Sometimes, that's what we need." Those words were like a faint ray of light in Helen's dark night. That evening, she announced her decision to Richard. "I've hired a new nurse for Lily. Her name is Clara. She's starting tomorrow." Richard, his eyes fixed on his laptop screen displaying green and red stock charts, simply nodded dismissively. "Fine. As long as she knows her job. Make sure to have my HR department do a thorough background check." He didn't ask about the nurse's experience. He didn't ask why Helen had chosen someone with an unimpressive resume. For him, she was just another employee hired to solve a problem he didn't have time to care about. He didn't know that Helen's seemingly small decision had just planted a seed in the arid soil of their family. A seed that would soon sprout, break through the concrete of indifference, and bring an unexpected glimmer of light. Richard Evans's world operated like a programmed Swiss watch, precise and flawless. From his 7 a.m. alarm to his black coffee at 7:15 and the waiting driver at 7:30, his life was a packed schedule of meetings, negotiations, and parties. For Richard, surprise was the enemy, and efficiency was everything. One gloomy Tuesday afternoon, the unexpected happened. A crucial negotiation with German partners was postponed due to a snowstorm. It was a minor glitch in Richard's perfect matrix. For the first time in years, he left the office at 4 p.m. The sky was still bright, a foreign sight to him. As his luxury car glided through the gate and into the driveway, he felt something was different. The house at this time would normally be steeped in solemn silence, with only the soft hum of the air purifier and the occasional light footsteps of a housekeeper. But today, as soon as he stepped through the heavy oak door, he heard a sound. A giggle. It was faint, weak, and a bit halting, but it was definitely a laugh. Richard froze in the hallway, the leather briefcase in his hand suddenly feeling heavier. The sound was so unfamiliar that his logical brain took a few seconds to process it. It was like a forgotten melody from a distant memory, a lullaby from childhood. He slowly followed the sound, his steps, which were usually decisive, now tiptoeing. The sound led him to the end of the hallway, to the physical therapy room. a space he had built with the most modern equipment but rarely set foot in. The door was slightly ajar. He peered through the crack, a secretive act unbefitting a CEO. And the scene inside stunned him, making him forget to breathe. On the green exercise mat, Clara, the new nurse with her simple ponytail, was kneeling. Her two hands were holding Lily's hips tightly. His daughter, her face flushed with effort, was trying to stand upright on her trembling, slender legs. She swayed like a young tree in the wind, but Clara held on tight, her voice not the command of a coach, but the whispered encouragement of a sister. "Well done, Lily. You're a warrior. Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wonderful." Lily slowly plopped down onto the mat, panting, with wisps of blonde hair falling over her forehead. But instead of her usual vacant expression, instead of the helpless tears that previous therapists had often witnessed, her eyes sparkled with pure pride. She looked up at Clara, and then a radiant smile bloomed on her small face. A genuine, pure, and unforced smile that lit up the room, which normally only smelled of disinfectant. "Clara, I did it. 5 seconds." Her voice was clear, mixed with innocent laughter. Richard stood rooted to the spot behind the door. His heart, which he had always thought of as just an organ to pump blood and endure work pressure, suddenly painfully constricted. It was his daughter's smile, a treasure he had spent a fortune trying to find in vain. Now, it was awakened by a stranger, in a room he only saw as an investment in her health. A complex feeling surged within him, a glimmer of joy, an inexplicable jealousy, and so much shame. He quietly backed away, his steps so light they made no sound, not wanting them to detect his presence, and walked back to his office, his mind a tangled mess. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Richard called Clara into his office. The room, with its dark oak paneling, a massive desk, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, was designed to exude power and solemnity, to make the person across from him feel small and submissive. But Clara walked in, her slender frame firm, her brown eyes looking straight at him, without a hint of fear or hesitation. He gestured for her to sit in the armchair across from his desk, a position reserved for interrogations. He interlaced his fingers and placed them on the desk, a posture of control. And that's when he spoke his cold, professionally veiled words of questioning. "You are acting on your own. Do you know that if anything happens, you will be solely responsible?" Clara didn't flinch at his authority. She looked directly into Richard's cold gray eyes, her voice calm but weighty, a stark contrast to her simple appearance. "Mr. Evans, I am fully aware of my responsibilities, and I know exactly what I'm doing." She paused for a moment, then continued. "My younger brother was also paralyzed after an accident. I was with him every day for 5 years. I learned that sometimes what's written in medical books is only one part. The other part, the most important part, is faith and hope." Her voice was still gentle but not weak, every word solid. "The doctors give Lily the best exercises. You give her the best equipment, but no one gives her a reason to try. Lily doesn't need another expert to tell her what she can't do, sir. She needs someone who believes she can. And I believe in that." The sincerity and fierce belief in Clara's voice were something Richard had never encountered in any of the top experts. They talked about metrics, charts, and percentages of probability. They talked about limitations. This girl, she talked about hope. For the first time, a crack appeared in the defensive wall Richard had built with money and power. He no longer saw Clara as a mere subordinate, but as someone who held a secret, a strength he couldn't understand and couldn't buy. He was silent for a long time, staring at the young woman. He tried to find a sign of arrogance or recklessness, but found only determination and a profound compassion. "All right," he said at last, his voice losing some of its harshness. "Continue. But I want a detailed report every day on your progress and methods." "Yes, sir." Clara nodded, then stood up and quietly left the room. That night, Richard didn't work. He just sat in the darkness of his office, the whiskey in his glass now cold. The image of Lily's smile kept replaying in his mind, brilliant and vibrant. A question repeated itself, like a persistent echo. Why not me? Why was it a stranger who brought that smile to his daughter's face? The question had no answer, but it planted a seed of doubt in him about the life he was living. After that conversation, a subtle change occurred in Richard's rigid schedule. He started coming home a little earlier, around 8 p.m., instead of 10. He told Helen it was because a major project had concluded, but the truth was that another project had just begun. He became a secret observer. He didn't tell anyone, not even Helen. He would quietly step into the house, gesture for the butler to be silent, and go straight to the end of the hallway. He didn't enter the therapy room. He just stood hidden behind the half-open door, a powerful CEO now acting like a curious child. From that position, he witnessed a completely different world being formed. That world was built with Clara's patience and imagination. He saw that she was not just a nurse performing exercises. She was a storyteller, a director, a companion. The parallel bars were no longer cold medical equipment but became a magic bridge across a river of crocodiles. Each time Lily crossed the bridge without being bitten by a crocodile, meaning without falling, the two of them would cheer in victory. The colorful physical therapy balls became planets in the galaxy, and astronaut Lily's mission was to use her feet to push them into their correct orbits. Richard stood there, speechless. He, who had built an empire with numbers and logic, was now witnessing his daughter being healed by fairy tales. He saw Clara turn the painful exercises, the things that used to make Lily scream and refuse, into joyful games. She never forced her, never showed impatience. When Lily got tired and wanted to give up, Clara would sit down beside her, not to lecture, but to tell a story about a little bird with a broken wing that never stopped dreaming of the sky. And then, Richard started noticing changes in Lily that no medical report could capture. Her eyes were no longer lifeless. They had begun to sparkle again, sometimes with intense focus on a challenge, and other times lighting up at one of Clara's funny stories. She started talking more, initially just single words, then complete sentences. She asked Clara about her family, about her younger brother. She told Clara about her favorite stuffed dog. Richard stood outside the door, listening to those snippets of conversation, feeling a deep jealousy and an unnamed sadness. His daughter was opening up, but not to him. One night, after Clara had gone, Richard went into Lily's room to say goodnight, a new habit he was trying to maintain. He sat on the edge of the bed, feeling that the silence between them was no longer as suffocating as before, but an invisible distance still remained. As he was about to get up and leave, a small hand tugged at his sleeve. This time, it was more confident than before. "Dad," Richard started, quickly sitting down, his heart pounding. "I'm here, my love." "What's wrong?" Lily looked up at him with her clear, hopeful blue eyes. Her voice was no longer a whisper but clearer, as if a sacred secret needed to be shared. Clara said, "If I keep practicing, one day, I'll be able to run." She paused, took a deep breath, her eyes shining as she spoke of a beautiful future. "I'll be able to run in the park with you, just like before." Silence fell over the room. Lily's words, so innocent and pure, were like a hammer blow to Richard's chest, shattering the layer of ice that had encased his heart for so long. Memories flooded back, not as vague thoughts, but as painfully vivid images. The image of 3-year-old Lily, her golden hair flying in the wind, toddling across the city park's green grass, her pure, clear laughter echoing through the air. And him, a younger, less tired version of himself, chasing after her, pretending to be a tickle monster. He remembered the feeling of soft grass under his feet, the warmth of the afternoon sun, and his daughter's endless laughter. When was that? 4 years ago? 5 years ago? It was before the company became a global empire, before meetings lasted until midnight, before his phone rang nonstop even in his dreams. He had been busy building a future for his daughter, a future with the best schools, the most luxurious vacations, a huge trust fund. But in the process, he had lost her present. What had he missed? No. He had missed everything. He realized that he had tried to buy his daughter everything except the one thing she truly needed: himself. His daughter's dream wasn't the latest tech gadget or a trip to Disneyland. Her dream was simply to run with her dad. A heartbreakingly simple dream, one he had unintentionally forgotten. Richard couldn't say a word. He just leaned down and hugged his little girl, trying to hold back the hot tears that were welling up. This time, he no longer felt awkward. He held her tight, feeling the warmth of her body, a connection he had longed for so long without realizing it. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He went down to his office, but didn't open his laptop. He just stood by the large window, looking down at the city sleeping below. The bright neon lights from the skyscrapers, symbols of his success, now seemed meaningless. He was standing on top of the world, yet he felt lonelier than ever. A decision formed in his mind, firm and unshakable. The next morning, the first thing Richard did when he arrived at the office was call his longtime secretary, Grace. "Grace," he said, his voice decisive and clear. "Cancel all my meetings before 10 a.m. every day. Until further notice." The other end of the line was silent for a second in shock. Grace had worked with him for over a decade and had never heard such a command. "Mr. Evans, but the board meeting about the merger project. It's very important." "Nothing is more important than this," Richard interrupted, his voice no longer holding its usual harshness, but a surprising calmness. "I have a more important project to be a part of. A personal project." He hung up, feeling a strange sense of relief. The burden of an entire corporation seemed to be lifted from his shoulders. For the first time, he didn't feel pressure from numbers and expectations. The most important project of his life wasn't in the skyscrapers, but was waiting for him at home, in a room. In the corner of the room, he watched with his hands clasped together. He felt redundant, out of place in the very world he was trying to enter. He saw his daughter straining until sweat beaded on her forehead, saw the moments she almost fell, and he could only silently clench his fists. His first instinct was to yell, "Be careful," but he managed to swallow the words, realizing that his overprotectiveness was part of the problem. But he didn't give up. On the second day, he didn't sit in the corner anymore. He moved closer to the exercise mat. As Clara was helping Lily practice standing with a walking frame, a strenuous exercise, he saw Clara wobble slightly. Without a moment's hesitation, he stepped forward. "Let me lend a hand," he offered, his voice less awkward. Clara nodded gratefully. "Can you hold her on this side, please?" Richard placed his hands on his daughter's shoulders. For the first time, he felt the trembling of every muscle straining under his palms. Those weren't just numbers on a medical report, they were their backs as they practiced standing, the two of them laughing heartily. She quietly backed away, her eyes glistening with happiness. She didn't want to break that sacred moment. The atmosphere in the house was no longer cold. Dinners were no longer filled with suffocating silence. Instead, there were lively conversations, recaps of Lily's achievements from the day's exercises. "Today, I stood for a whole 20 seconds without holding on, Dad," Lily exclaimed, her face radiant. "Really?" Richard pretended to be surprised. "That's amazing. We have to celebrate with a big ice cream tomorrow. But don't tell Mom." He winked at his daughter, an intimate gesture he had never made before. Helen sat across from them, smiling as she watched the two of them. For the first time in years, she felt like she was living in a real family. Richard was discovering things he never knew about his daughter, small but incredibly precious pieces of the puzzle. She liked purple, hated eating broccoli, and had a vivid imagination. Lily held onto the back of the chair, slowly standing up. She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on her father's face. Then, she let go. The first step, she swayed. Richard almost lunged forward, but Clara's look stopped him. The second step, a little steadier. Her legs trembled, but she didn't look down. Her eyes were always looking forward, toward her parents' waiting arms, like a lighthouse in the dark. 3, 4, 5, 10 steps in a row. She almost lost her balance on the last step, but with an incredible effort, she regained her footing and threw herself into Richard's arms. "Dad, I did it. I can walk." Lily screamed through her sobs, hugging his neck tightly, burying her face in his shoulder. Richard held her close, tears streaming down his cheeks. He was no longer a cold CEO, but simply a father overwhelmed with happiness. He kissed her golden hair, his voice trembling, words catching in his throat. "That's right, my love. You did." And now, the principal's voice rang out from the speaker. "Let's welcome a special talent, Lily Evans." From backstage, a 9-year-old girl with her golden hair tied in a high ponytail, wearing a pretty lavender dress, confidently walked out. She didn't need a wheelchair or crutches. Her steps were steady and graceful. Only when the light shone on her closely did people see a small, elegant brace around one of her legs. Not a sign of weakness, but a memory of an extraordinary journey. Lily walked to the center of the stage, standing in front of a microphone that had been lowered to her height. She took a deep breath, her blue eyes scanning the auditorium, then stopped at the third row. There, Richard, Helen, and Clara sat side by side, holding hands. Richard was no longer wearing his business suit. He wore a simple sweater, looking relaxed and happy. His eyes were fixed on his little girl on stage, not with the gaze of a CEO evaluating. Fear. Dad was by my side every day, turning my tears into laughter. Dad taught me how to fight and never give up. Thank you, Dad. Richard felt his eyes blur. He quickly wiped them, but the tears of pride and happiness kept falling. Helen squeezed his hand, resting her head on his shoulder, also crying. And my second hero is Clara. Lily turned to Clara, her smile becoming even more radiant. Clara, in her simple floral dress, looked small in the crowd, but in Lily's eyes, she was a giant. She was the first person to believe I could do it, even when I didn't believe in myself. She held my hand and showed me that inside me there was a strength greater than I thought. She taught me something very important. Lily paused for a moment, looking directly at everyone in the hall, her voice becoming powerful and inspiring. She taught me that even without wings, we can still fly. Thank you, Clara. You didn't just heal my daughter, you saved our whole family. The final scene wasn't about stage lights or applause. The final scene was backstage, in a crowded and noisy space where no one else could see. Richard, Helen, Lily, and Clara hugged each other, forming a warm and unbreakable circle. There was no longer a boss and an employee, no longer a distance of social status. They were simply a family that had gone through a storm together, mended by love and supported by a kind heart. Lily, in everyone's embrace, looked up at them, her smile shining brighter than any stage light. Her painful journey had ended, but a new beginning, a life full of laughter and confident steps, had just begun.